Florida State is finally going to have a new quarterback.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith. Thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. Truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles football with me. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. All right. I've asked for it. Many of you have asked for it. And now it has come to fruition, albeit through unfortunate circumstances. DJ Uiagalelei is no longer going to be able to start for Florida State, at least for the foreseeable future. And that means there's going to be a new quarterback for the Florida State Seminoles. Glenn and Kromenhoek and Glenn are going to battle it out. I would assume Brock has the edge. He's been in the program a year and going into his second year. He was the guy that most people thought was the second string quarterback through summer, etc. And he did play in the game against SMU. Now, with the competition open, who knows what's going to happen? But Florida State is also playing Clemson this weekend. Not exactly the easiest team to come in to Doak Campbell for a freshman or a redshirt freshman to play. All notice to that. But this is really interesting on many levels. And I want to give everybody a chance. I'll get to the chat here in just a little bit. I want to give everybody a chance to think about the following statements about freshman quarterbacks. They make a lot of mistakes. They don't have a lot of sense with the playbook in terms of how to operate it, audibles, the checks, all the things that come with it. And I get that. But there's no way to get to where you need to be as a program unless guys go through the ups and downs of a quarterback. Let me give you an example. What did you think of Jordan Travis, say 2020, early portion of 2021? I know I didn't think much of him. I thought he was pretty awful for the most part because he didn't believe in himself. And you could tell with his body language. It takes time, sometimes years. I know fans hate it. I'm not a big proponent of it either, but quarterback usually means 2 to 3 years of growing pains and then 1 to 1.5 seasons. Pretty good. That's the norm in college football. Oftentimes a similar type of success at the NFL level, if you're lucky. That's obviously much, much more difficult. Florida State is in a better situation now than they were, let's say, in many of the other seasons because they didn't have to bring in a transfer, et cetera, to at least be the backup. Obviously, DJ is the starting quarterback until otherwise noted when he's healthy, and he is a transfer. But they got 2 guys on the roster they like that are younger. They're going to get a chance to play. So today, I want to talk about what I know about each of Glenn and Kromenhoek as I saw them come up through the ranks. Saw both in Elite 11 competitions. I know Kromenhoek pretty well, seen him play a high school game, numerous 7-on-7 tournaments. And I think they're both talented players that have some similarities. So I'm going to do that here just a little bit. But I'm just excited for a little bit of change. And again, before I go any further, by the way, I hope DJ gets the situation taken care of with his finger. That doesn't sound like it's very much fun. For those you don't remember or didn't see, he was literally trying to put his finger back in place in the middle of the game against SMU. That's pretty tough stuff. I can't imagine what that felt like. And I'm guessing it was pretty horrendous. So good for him for getting a chance to play and good for him for getting a chance to come out and compete for Florida State and want to play on. I give him all the credit in the world. But, man, on your throwing hand, having a finger dislocated, broken, anything of that nature, that doesn't sound like it's something that's going to be easy to overcome. I don't know if they're sending him to a specialist. I don't know all the details just from listening to Norvell and, reading some comments. That sounds like something that could last a while. They may not even know specifically because it depends on exactly where in the finger that there's a problem, how he grips the football, how much discomfort he has when he throws. There's so many questions for DJ as he gets through the procedure, whatever it may be, and then tries to rehabilitate and get back on the gridiron. So here are my thoughts on Glenn and Kromenhoek, just to give it a little bit of a start. Number one, I've seen a lot more of Luke because he's from Georgia and he's a kid that was in the 7-on-7 circuit in the state of Florida and Georgia a lot where I went to many events. But I saw Brock as well at the Elite 11 in LA. And he's a kid that just kind of lets it rip, which fits Florida State to a T historically. I don't know if he has the ability to be the starting quarterback long-term. I don't know if he knows, but you got to let him go out and throw the ball. He's mobile enough to play in a pro-style scheme, but with some bootleg and waggle, kind of fits that. And if you need him to run a quarterback draw, speed option, something like that, he can do that too. He's a pretty good athlete. I'm not saying he's Jordan Travis, let's be clear, but he can move. I'm curious to see how much, and I assume he'll be the starter because he's been in the system a year longer, but I'm curious to see how much he gets the ball and tries to do something with it with his legs. Younger players sometimes have more success when they run, whether it's a screen pass to a receiver who doesn't know the route tree, a running back, just basic plays, getting the ball, letting make moves, and a quarterback draws, quarterback option, RPO. Give them a handful of very basic tasks and let the physical traits dictate the pace from there. I think Brock will fit that pretty well. Now is the big question. He's been here a year. He knows the system at least a little bit, but how comfortable is he inside his head to do it? And B, how comfortable are all of his receivers, tight ends, and running backs catching passes from him? This is something I've said on this show numerous times. It applies to Florida State and every other college football team. There is no substitute for a massive number of reps from spring, summer, and fall camp with the number ones. He doesn't have it. There's just no way to substitute it. The comfortability of that tight end or that receiver on a 3rd and 6, knowing where you're going to be, knowing where to throw the back shoulder fade to a guy, etc. He doesn't have the same number of reps that DJ did. So you got to ad lib a little bit, as only the coaching staff will know how to do. They get him every day at practice, but they also have to understand this is Clemson's defense. Jaden Lucas, Terrell, some of these guys, they can go get it. And their pass rush is legit. I'll talk about some of Clemson's numbers here in a little bit too. But goodness gracious, we're talking about an opportunity to at least get your feet wet. And obviously you're jumping into the fire too. It's Clemson. But they're not the greatest defense. So maybe he can do well. And even if he doesn't, I also expect Glenn and Kromenhoek to play. Let's talk a little bit about him. He's a willing runner. He's a guy that's a pretty strong kid. He's added a lot of good muscle in the last year or so. When I saw him play for Benedictine Military School in Savannah, Georgia last year, he had a few key plays where pass rush got to him really fast. He'd make a guy miss. He'd sidestep. Sometimes he still didn't get out of the play and he might get sacked or whatever, but he is agile enough to do it. And he can take off and run, similar very much to Brock Glenn, where I think they differ just a little bit, at least from their senior film, and I haven't been around Brock much since. Pure arm strength, I think Luke at the high school level was a tad bit better. I've seen him enough that I have a pretty good sense of it, but I have seen way more of Luke than I have Brock. I mean, it's like 10-1. So I don't know how to really compare that, but I think long-term Luke has the higher ceiling just with his arm. That's my guess. Again, I'd have to go see him throw today or tomorrow or whatever to know for sure, but that's my guess. The other thing that I think it's interesting about Luke is he likes to challenge teams in the middle of the field. He's the polar opposite of DJ in that regard. He did it 7-on-7 level. He did it also at Benedictine, whether it's a long over-the-top bomb or threading the needle in a very dangerous area, to be quite honest. Past the linebacker, before the safety, those in-between throws that are really, really risky, he'll throw it, and he has the arm to complete it. That's very key. If you cannot challenge the middle of the field, as we've seen this year with Florida State, teams will exploit you, and they'll do it over and over. Florida State is no different than any other team with that. Those safeties are going to get closer and closer to the line of scrimmage. Almost every game, Florida State's run game starts out good and then just falls off a cliff. Those safeties come down and it's over. It's just math. So one of these guys I'm hoping can do that a little bit, but it's different at the college level than it is high school to see the linebackers and safeties, how they move, how they change, the look that they provide after the snap as compared to before. It's flat out. The intent is to fool you and to get freebies. Florida State does not need to be handing out any more freebies. They've already had 6 picks, I believe it is. Don't need any more. So I'm curious to also see what Florida State staff does to try to help out both of Glenn and Kromenhoek, because let's be honest, redshirt freshman quarterbacks, they tend to throw the ball to the wrong team. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Clemson's defense, some of the things I think they can do, and get into the chat just a little bit. That's next on Locked On Seminoles. Have you checked out Gametime yet? The Gametime app is a great app if you want to go to any kind of sporting event, a music festival, a concert, maybe some kind of play, just about anything you can think of that you would buy a ticket to. There's a pretty darn good chance that Gametime has an opportunity for you. Because of Brock Glenn and because of Luke Kromenhoek, the game against Clemson this weekend, I was on the Gametime app just before this show. There are plenty of tickets under $100, and you can even adjust their ticket pricing inside the app on Gametime to get all-inclusive pricing to know what you're getting at the beginning and end, so you don't have to worry about any changes at the end of your purchase. So with that in mind, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for 20% off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on with Clemson. They've been hot offensively. I talked about that on yesterday's show. That's fact. But they've also been a team that defensively has been a little concerning. They got a ton of defensive talent in their front seven. A ton. They got guys that are going to go to the draft, etc., but they are extremely inconsistent. I don't know what the deal is there. I've only watched them a little bit. But I was going through some of their stats, and I'm looking at it now. They got different guys with quarterback hurries, sacks, tackles for loss, etc. And the thing that's very consistent with it is the fact that a lot of these tackles just aren't made near the line of scrimmage. Here's what I mean by that. If you go into their rushing statistics, and I'll share my screen for those of you on YouTube here in just a second. If you look at their game log, this is surprising. You think of Clemson, you think of top 15-ish defense conservatively every year. And sometimes, quite honestly, that defense is as good as it gets in the country. Well, in this particular case, that's not the situation. So Florida State is, I know their run game hasn't been great, and Clemson's probably going to try to smother them. But here are the stats, and I'll go ahead and share my screen while I'm thinking of it. Florida State is hopefully able to run at least for a couple of quarters. I guess that's the best way to put it, because Florida State needs that ability to make it happen. If you're going to give these young quarterbacks any chance at all, and I mean any chance, you got to be able to run the ball. Georgia, 27 carries, 169 yards, 6.3 yards per carry. Appalachian State, 27 carries, 149 yards, 5.5 yards per carry. North Carolina State, 38 carries, 179 yards, 4.7 yards per carry. And then Stanford this past week, 44 carries, 236 yards, and 5.4 yards per carry. There is nothing like a running game to help an offense and, quite honestly, help a young quarterback. Both Brock Glenn and Luke Kromenhoek could certainly use some of the numbers that I'm talking about here. And I, again, am very surprised by the numbers that Clemson has given up. But if you give a young quarterback 2nd and 6, 2nd and 5, he can run a bootleg, he can run a waggle, RPO, he can run the ball again. You can take a shot down the field. You can more or less eliminate some of the difficult throws that I was talking about earlier in the middle of the field and dictate when you want to take them instead of being forced into taking them. So if they can run the ball, they got a decent chance to keep the game at least close. I don't expect Florida State to beat Clemson with a freshman or redshirt freshman quarterback. I'm not an idiot. But this game may be a little better than you think. There's also a chance for Clemson to have a little bit of a letdown. That's just my opinion. We'll see here in a second. But I also think this game could go the other way. If Clemson figures it out and just comes down and takes away Florida State's run right out the gate, that could be ugly. Let's not kid ourselves. This could be ugly too. Just because we want to see the new toys doesn't mean the new toys are ready and up to speed. They're not. But it's a starting point. Again, you've got to be able to do this. Case and Quick says Mike Norvell has got to go. And he also says he can't recruit. Well, right now it's probably pretty hard. I can assure you that. Let's see. Jim, this will be a very competitive game until Clemson gets the ball. Jim, that's cruel, man. That's cruel. I know quarterback shows bring eyes, but the bigger question is better find out what you have in the trenches more than quarterback. Well, that's another thing. Florida State's lineup's been changing. They've got injury issues. They've got guys that have been banged up, multiple guys. That's a problem. I don't think there's much you can really do about that. I'm worried about guys having to move around. And Richie Leonard is out for the rest of the season. I think that's a problem. But at the same time, I really don't know what you can do about it. You know what? Offensive line is one of those spots where guys get hurt. Then you move somebody else in, even if it's a more physically gifted player. And again, with a freshman quarterback, this gets more complex. I'll talk about that in a second. It's the chemistry. If you don't have O-line chemistry, you have little to no chance in any style of offense, high school, college, or pro. So Richie Leonard being out, Rob Scott's been a guy that's banged up. Their Byers has been banged up. They've just had a lot of stuff going on. Darius has been banged up. They're not in a great spot at O-line right now. Physically, and then mentally, I've talked about this many times on the show, and a lot of you commented as well. Florida State's O-line, they have these colossal errors out of nowhere that'll cost them a drive. It could be a 1st and 10 play or a 3rd and 2 play. There's a missed block, like a guy all but comes scot-free, if not scot-free, and it interrupts the play in the backfield, and then you're in trouble. So part of that, I think, is the fear factor is very little. The Florida State's going to throw the middle of the field, and the safeties are down in the box. Obviously, the linebackers there. It's just too many guys, but also part of the time is they miss part of it. So that brings up the big question. Being a quarterback doesn't mean throwing the ball. Quarterback means you're directing everything, including line calls, including knowing at a very early point when the play clock is running down what the defense is in so you can adjust. Are either of these young guys, Brock Glenn or Luke Kromenhoek, going to be able to do that? Clemson's offense is one thing. It's not easy to handle. Their defense might be more difficult because their D-line is very, very talented. They're tremendous at rushing the passer. That's not good considering what Florida State's been doing in terms of pass protection. And they have enough depth to rotate guys. It'll be a warm day in Florida, et cetera, when they come to Doak, but probably won't bother Clemson much. Luke and or Brock, they've got to know what those protections are and be able to adjust on the fly. They're also going to bring some, I guarantee you, some nickel blitzes, some corner blitzes from the short side of the field. Drop the defensive end of the flat, bring the linebacker, or loop a safety around through the middle. They're going to see stuff they cannot prepare for. It is the proverbial figure it out on the fly, which is terrible, but that's why college defense coordinators make a lot of money. Make them uncomfortable, and they're going to do it. How do they react? No matter which one is in the game at the time, and I expect both to play. How do each of Luke and Brock react? They're going to have a bad play. They're going to have a pick. They're going to have a strip sack fumble. There are going to be some ugly moments in this game. I guarantee it. Your character is built oftentimes through a bad play or a bad series, maybe even a bad half. How do you come back and react? If you're mentally not ready to play, those bad plays will take you into the dumpster real quick. But if you understand you got to go next play and just make it happen, if it starts out a series, you're down 2nd and 13 because you fumbled the snap or you didn't read it right and you didn't get them out of the worst running call you could have had. It's just bad luck. They had a blitz on. You didn't realize it soon enough. You didn't call timeout. You ran into it. How do you react on that next play, especially if it's a pass? Do you try to force it? Or if it's not there, do you throw it away or at least take off and get a few yards? It's about above the shoulders with quarterback. And I'm fascinated to see what each of Glenn and Kromenhoek do. I have no idea what they're really capable of, but those are some of the things that I'm curious about. All right. Florida State needs Jesus because this is a sad season for us. I think a lot of people need Jesus, my friend, but it could be worse. Let's see. What else can we really talk about here in regards to Florida State ability to kind of, how do I put this? make it comfortable as much as they can. Clemson's a terrible team to have a quarterback change for. That's obvious. But besides running the ball, the obvious, they're going to have to come up with something in the screen game, in the short passing game, that's not as blatantly obvious as I think it's going to be. Clemson's going to jump everything short. They're going to try to take away the easy access throws, as they're called, anything that's 5 to 8 yards, quick slants, hitches, and they're going to really dive hard on screens. You're going to have to make post-snap progression kind of reads, which even though it's an RPO offense, I still call it that, because part of it is just the gut to get out of the pocket. What's your pocket presence? How much time do I have before I get hit? All those things are part of post-snap progression. We have no idea what they can do. We really don't. And that's okay. I get that, and it's part of it. RQ305 says 1-4, about to be 1-5, and you still have faith in Mike. Well, I don't know if everybody's got faith in him or not, but right now it's the only thing people want to talk about is quarterback, and rightfully so. I'm not really sure if Mike is the answer, but I'm not really sure if he's not either, because with the new quarterback, he gets a little bit of new life. I'm really down on Norvell right now, but if he wants to win me back, he can figure out one of these quarterbacks quickly. It's a lot to ask, but it's still something that could technically possibly happen. Coming up next, we're going to talk a little bit more about this before we wrap up the show, but this is the opportunity everybody's been waiting on. Florida State's getting a new quarterback, so let's talk some more Noles. It's in more Noles quarterbacks. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Here are the things that I would do if I had Luke or Brock starting. And again, I assume it's going to be Brock, but whichever one starts, and regardless, whichever one's in the game, I would do everything I can, this is so ironic, to take the plays out of the middle of the field away. Clemson knows that too, but it is what it is. The chances of turnovers will skyrocket on throws over the middle with freshmen or redshirt freshmen. Guarantee it. There's just more hands up in their face. It's easier to lose players. High risk, very high risk. But Clemson knows this. I would run more stack, meaning literally 2 receivers stacked, to get rid of some of the bump and run, force them off the line, because Clemson has the corners to take away easy access throws. And I would run almost every single play would be some kind of bunch formation. Make them play zone and or match defense. It's much more complex, and it's more difficult for them to run because Clemson, again, has the athletes like Jaden Lucas. He's a freak, 6'1" guy that can really run at corner. Make them uncomfortable instead of the other way around. 2, you got to try to run the ball. I talk about running on first down all the time. There is no doubt Florida State has to find a way to run the ball on first downs. If they cannot, just a little bit later in the game when you'd want to use those same formations you ran on, but then go play action or bootleg or do something with it, they won't be effective. It is imperative that Florida State runs the ball early in the game, and it isn't in second nines. That's, it's hard for a really good quarterback. Second and long when you've got a young kid, man, that's almost impossible. It's not that they can't get some first downs, but my concern is if Clemson gets up and Florida State starts throwing the ball, the game could go sideways, and it could really hurt the confidence of a young player. You got to run your offense, though. Like I said at the beginning of the show, Clemson doesn't have a group of kids that are coming out there to be nice. I mean, they got some dudes on defense. They're going to come after Brock and Luke. They're going to see blitzes. They're going to see the kitchen sink. Anything they run, it'll be a while before they run it again. They want everything in live moments to be new, and new. Because freshmen and redshirt freshmen under new circumstances with what they're seeing are going to fail more often than not. This is, again, a very open book. So you got to be able to run the ball to take pressure off them, because they're probably going to miss some reads, being kind, and they're probably going to have a couple turnovers. Again, probably being kind. That's the nature of the beast. As a Florida State fan, anybody watching this that's going to watch the game at Doak this weekend, whether live or on TV, whatever, two things that I advise for you. Just watch the raw talent, not necessarily the result. If you're going to grade them on result, I don't know why you're going to the game. This is probably not going to be pretty. This is probably going to be a smackdown from Clemson to Florida State. They were the better team anyway, and now you're starting a freshman or a redshirt freshman. That's rough. Just the way I see it. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe Florida State makes this a good game. But Clemson's offense is legit. I mentioned this yesterday. Between two games, ending in one and beginning in another, they had 12 drives in a row, with touchdowns. Needless to say, Florida State is not going to do that with this circumstance. So don't expect a win, but it's more about what's for the future. That's what's coming up for Florida State. Coming up on Thursday, I'm going to put this show up on the main part of the page on YouTube and post it to all the different channels that you want to watch at Apple or want to download at Apple, Spotify, CastBox, Amazon, etc. But coming up on Thursday, we're going to talk a little recruiting and how this impacts Florida State long-term. They just saw a moment ago, they got a receiver that just decommitted. Florida State's got some recruiting needs. I'm going to talk a little big box recruiting on the next show. It's getting a little bad feeling here that the recruiting cracks are going to be pretty big and pretty soon. It is what it is, though. Recruiting's in a tough spot right now. Before I leave, we'll go ahead and read this from Michael Madden. A new quarterback isn't going to solve much. The receivers and tight ends can't get open or catch the ball with any consistency, and the O-line can't block. Look, you're not wrong. You're not wrong, but that's part of the deal, man. Florida State's got to fix it. The only way you can fix it is to go play. You got to get better, and part of it's going to be a little bit of attrition along the way. With that, once again, I appreciate everybody for stopping in and talking some Noles football with me. Please hit that like button, that notification bell, subscribe to this podcast, share it wherever you can, and comment as well. Thank you very much, and I will see you again tomorrow.